God. Said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment, my friend. Listen to me carefully this morning, because what I am about to speak into your spirit will make sense of a season you couldn't understand, a feeling you couldn't explain, and a silence you couldn't interpret. I want you to lean in with your whole heart, because this is not an ordinary message. This is a divine revelation concerning where you are and where God is taking you. Heaven is announcing something over your life today with clarity and authority. I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. Not just turning loneliness into company. Not turning loneliness into distraction. Not turning loneliness into temporary comfort. Not turning loneliness into noise. Not turning loneliness into emotional relief, but turning loneliness, your loneliness, into alignment. Alignment with purpose. Alignment with identity. Alignment with destiny. Alignment with the right people. Alignment with the right opportunities. Alignment with the next season of your assignment. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. Some of you have been walking through a lonely season that you didn't choose. A season that felt forced on you by circumstances. Life transitions. Broken relationships. Unexpected endings. And inner shifts you couldn't ignore. People you depended on became distant. People you trusted became unavailable. People who once understood you suddenly could not hear you. People you once walked with were no longer aligned with the direction you needed to go. And you wondered, God, why am I walking alone? But today, heaven reveals the reason, because I am aligning you. Your loneliness is not punishment, it is positioning. Your loneliness is not abandonment, it is adjustment. Your loneliness is not rejection, it is redirection. Your loneliness is not a sign of failure, it is a signal of transition. Your loneliness is not emptiness, it is preparation. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. Some of you thought loneliness meant something was wrong with you. You questioned your worth. You questioned your desirability. You questioned your value. You questioned your purpose. You questioned your identity, because the isolation felt personal, painful, and confusing. But hear me, loneliness is not a reflection of your inadequacy. It is evidence of your evolution. You have outgrown places, patterns, and people. You are no longer who you were. And your spirit refuses to return to environments that no longer fit your calling. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. Some of you have been asking God to bring the right people, but he first had to remove the wrong ones. You prayed for destiny connections, but God had to clear the space those old relationships occupied. You prayed for elevation, but God had to disconnect you from those who kept you low. You prayed for clarity, but God had to silence voices that confused your identity. You prayed for divine partnerships, but God had to end dysfunctional agreements. Your loneliness is not lack, it is cleansing. God is clearing your relational atmosphere so he can align you with what matches your future. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. Some of you have been fighting the ending of relationships because you didn't recognize the beginning of revelation. You held on to bonds you had emotionally outgrown. You tried to revive connections God had already released. You tried to maintain closeness with people who could not go where you are going. You tried to force understanding from those who could not comprehend your calling. But God allowed the distance. God allowed the disconnect. God allowed the silence. God allowed the discomfort. God allowed the separation, because divine alignment requires divine isolation. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. Some of you feel lonely because you are in a season of becoming stronger, becoming wiser, becoming more disciplined, becoming spiritually grounded, becoming more focused, becoming more intentional. And becoming sometimes requires separation. You cannot transform in environments that resist your growth. You cannot evolve among people who benefit from your stagnation. You cannot rise while surrounded by those who expect the old version of you. So God separated you so he could elevate you. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. Some of you are lonely because God pulled you away from noise of opinions, noise of expectations, noise of comparison, noise of cultural pressure, noise of emotional clutter, noise of internal lies. And in the quiet, you began to hear yourself. You began to hear God more clearly. You began to confront things you avoided. You began to rediscover parts of yourself you ignored. You began to recognize patterns that distracted you. Loneliness became the classroom of your identity. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. Some of you think loneliness means nothing is happening. But loneliness is where God is doing his deepest work. He is pruning you, refining you, detoxing you, redirecting you, rebuilding you, recalibrating you, strengthening you, realigning your desires, resetting your priorities, reconstructing your identity. Loneliness is not the absence of activity, it is the presence of divine construction. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. Some of you feel lonely because you have a calling that demands separation. Purpose requires preparation. Assignment requires focus. Spiritual growth requires solitude. God cannot elevate you publicly until he strengthens you privately. He cannot give you influence externally until he builds your capacity internally. He cannot trust you with people until he teaches you how to stand alone. Loneliness is the training ground of leaders. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. Some of you feel lonely because your spiritual frequency has changed. You cannot connect with the same conversations. You cannot tolerate shallow relationships. You cannot entertain meaningless distractions. You cannot participate in old cycles. You cannot attach to what drains you. You cannot feed on the same emotional diet. You cannot stay in environments that no longer resonate with your purpose. Your spirit has become selective. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. Some of you feel lonely because God has raised your standards. You cannot be with people who do not respect your boundaries. You cannot remain in relationships that dishonor your worth. You cannot continue with connections that compromise your peace. You cannot invest in bonds that weaken your identity. Higher calling requires higher standards. And higher standards will isolate you from what used to feel normal. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. Let me tell you something clearly. Loneliness is not a problem when God is behind it. Loneliness becomes holy when God uses it. Loneliness becomes transformational when God guides it. Loneliness becomes purposeful when God directs it. Your lonely season is not a valley, it is an elevator. It is lifting you into clarity. It is lifting you into maturity. It is lifting you into purpose. It is lifting you into discernment. It is lifting you into spiritual strength. It is lifting you into self-awareness. It is lifting you into alignment with God's plan. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. Some of you don't realize it, but your loneliness is exposing what was misaligned in your life. Misaligned habits, misaligned priorities, misaligned relationships, misaligned expectations, misaligned dependencies, misaligned desires, misaligned self-worth. Loneliness is the light that reveals what darkness hid. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. Some of you have been asking God to send the right people, but you've been unwilling to release the familiar ones. But alignment requires subtraction before addition. God must remove what's familiar to release what's fitting. God must detach what's seasonal to release what's covenantal. God must clear what's limited to release what's destined. God must separate what was for who you were to release what's for who you're becoming. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. Some of you are lonely because God is resetting your relational identity. You are learning who you are without the voices of others shaping your decisions. You are learning to trust your own discernment. You are learning to set boundaries without guilt. You are learning to choose peace over attachment. You are learning to value solitude without feeling unloved. You are learning to recognize the difference between connection and dependency. Loneliness is teaching you who you are. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. Some of you feel lonely because God has silenced the noise so you can finally hear his instructions. You have been asking for direction, but you were surrounded by too many voices. You have been asking for clarity, but your environment was too distracting. You have been asking for purpose, but your heart was too crowded. And now in the stillness, God is guiding you. Loneliness has created a sacred space for revelation. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. Some of you feel lonely because God is protecting you from wrong connections, protecting you from harmful associations, protecting you from spiritual contamination, protecting you from emotional manipulation, protecting you from relationships that would derail your destiny, protecting you from environments that would corrupt your identity. Loneliness is God's shield around your calling. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. Some of you feel lonely because your spirit is shifting dimensions. You are no longer aligned with where you were, but not yet aligned with where you're going. That in-between space feels like isolation, but it is actually transition. You are not stuck, you are being moved. You are not abandoned, you are being positioned. You are not empty, you are being reset. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. Let me speak directly to your heart. This loneliness will not last. This loneliness will not break you. This loneliness will not define you. This loneliness will not follow you into your next season. Because God is not leaving you in loneliness, He is leading you through loneliness. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. You will soon understand why certain people couldn't stay. You will soon understand why certain friendships faded. You will soon understand why certain relationships collapsed. You will soon understand why certain paths closed. You will soon understand why certain doors never opened. God was aligning you. God was protecting you. God was repositioning you. God was preparing you. God was developing you. God was strengthening you. The loneliness you feel today will make sense tomorrow. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. And soon, very soon, alignment will manifest in your relationships. People who speak your language. People who value your growth. People who respect your boundaries. People who match your energy. People who pray with you. People who grow with you. People who push you forward. People who honor your calling. People who understand your journey. People who contribute, not just consume. People who are safe for your destiny. Alignment is coming. Alignment is forming. Alignment is unfolding. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. This loneliness is birthing clarity. This loneliness is birthing discernment. This loneliness is birthing maturity. This loneliness is birthing independence. This loneliness is birthing spiritual strength. This loneliness is birthing emotional healing. This loneliness is birthing purpose. This loneliness is birthing new identity. Your loneliness is not a prison, it is a womb. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. And when God finishes this alignment, you will thank Him for every person He removed. You will thank Him for every silence He allowed. You will thank Him for every empty room you had to sit in. You will thank Him for every quiet night you cried. You will thank Him for every season that felt deserted, because those were the moments He rebuilt you. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment. You are being positioned for divine partnerships, divine friendships, divine opportunities, divine assignments, divine connections, divine direction, divine timing, divine favor, divine environments. This is not random. This is not accidental. This is not coincidental. This is alignment. God said, I'm turning loneliness into divine alignment, and nothing, no past, no fear, no insecurity, no attack, no delay can stop what God is aligning for you.